Sophia was staring at a red final notice, bill for her mother's surgery, when the shadows in the hospital corridor shifted. I need a wife. Someone real. Someone who won't love me. She looked up into the icy gaze of Dr. Alexander Reid. He wasn't just a surgeon. He was a titan. And right now he was looking at her like she was his last hope. 1 month, Sophia? I pay the bills. You wear the ring. But remember the rule, don't fall in love. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was Dr. Alexander Reid, billionaire surgeon, name etched on the Forbes list, the man whose mere presence made boardrooms fall silent and women forget how to breathe. But tonight, in the shadows of that cold corridor, his usual icy control had cracked. Those steel gray eyes held something raw, something desperate, a wounded soul screaming silently for salvation. Sophia Bennett was just a simple nurse. No designer scrubs, no luxury apartment, no influential last name to shield her. Only calloused hands from double shifts, dark circles under her warm brown eyes, and a fiercely beating heart that refused to give up. Every single day she pushed through the hospital doors carrying the weight of her mother's mounting medical bills on her slim shoulders. She never chased attention. She never fluttered her lashes at rich doctors or smiled for the cameras. She kept her head down, did her job with quiet honesty, and went home to the tiny apartment she could barely afford. That was exactly why, out of hundreds of beautiful and ambitious women circling Dr. Reid like sharks, he had chosen her, because in a world full of polished lies, Sophia Bennett was devastatingly real. Dr. Alexander Reid was not merely rich, he was a force of nature, wrapped in tailored suits and surgical precision. His father, Sir William Reid, had built the Reid Medical empire from nothing into a $4.7 billion colossus. Alexander had taken that legacy and carved his own legend as one of the most brilliant cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. Women threw themselves at him. Men envied and feared him. Paparazzi stalked his every move. Yet behind the sharp jawline, the expensive watches and the Arctic gaze, lived a man suffocating inside a golden cage forged by his own family. Expectations, control, and one merciless ultimatum that threatened to strip away everything he had built. The ultimatum had dropped, like a guillotine 3 weeks earlier, at the family dinner. Sir William had declared in his cold, commanding voice, "Alexander, if you are not married within the next 45 days, every share, every property, every hospital under the Reid empire will go to your cousin, Carter." The words still echoed in Alexander's mind. He had laughed that night, but the legal documents were already prepared and the clock was mercilessly ticking. He had zero interest in the shallow socialites. His family paraded before him, women who wanted his money and status, not the man beneath. He needed someone genuine, someone unbreakable, someone who would never, ever fall in love with him. That fateful night, Sophia had been dragging herself through her third consecutive shift. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, her back ached, and she clutched a thick patient file like a lifeline. When Alexander stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path, she nearly dropped everything. He stood there in his crisp white coat, looking impossibly perfect despite the late hour, but his jaw was clenched and those piercing eyes carried a vulnerability she had never witnessed before. He stared at her for a long, heavy moment, then lowered his voice to a rough whisper that brushed against her skin. "Be my wife, just for 1 month." Sophia blinked, stunned. A tired, disbelieving laugh escaped her. "Sir, are you okay? Did you hit your head in surgery?" But Dr. Alexander Reid was dead serious. Without another word, he handed her a thick-sealed white envelope. Inside lay a meticulously prepared 14-page contract, complete with legal stamps and notarized clauses. The terms were crystal clear. Sophia would pretend to be his wife for exactly 30 days, attending family events, dinners, and one grand public ceremony. In exchange, he would wipe out every single cent of her mother's crushing medical debt and pay her an additional $500,000 upon successful completion. Sophia's hands trembled violently as she read the numbers. Her mother's pale, suffering face flashed before her eyes. This was insane, reckless, but those figures, they were painfully, temptingly real. Then came the condition that hit her like ice water. Alexander crossed his powerful arms and stated in a low, uncompromising voice, There is one unbreakable rule above everything else. You will not fall in love with me, ever. If I detect even the slightest sign that your feelings are becoming genuine, the deal ends instantly. No payment, no debt clearance, nothing. Sophia stared straight into those cold eyes. A soft, almost amused laugh left her lips. Fall in love with this emotionally frozen, arrogant man? She straightened her tired shoulders, met his gaze without flinching, and replied firmly, "Sir, trust me. That will be the easiest condition I have ever agreed to in my entire life." She signed the contract at exactly 2:17 a.m., her signature small but steady. By morning, her entire world had been flipped upside down. A sleek black Maybach waited outside her rundown apartment building. 3 sharply dressed assistants arrived at her door carrying garment bags, designer shoeboxes, jewelry cases, and a thick cream-colored schedule. Her neighbors gawked from their windows in disbelief. Standing in the middle of her tiny, cluttered room surrounded by items that cost more than she earned in 5 years, Sophia felt a wave of pure terror wash over her. She immediately called her best friend Lauren. Lauren screamed for a full 45 seconds straight before gasping, "Sophia Bennett, do not fall in love with him. I'm serious. That man destroys hearts for breakfast." The first family dinner felt like walking into a battlefield, wearing nothing but armor made of hope. Alexander's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Reid, was elegance personified, a woman who could deliver the sweetest smile while slicing you open with surgical precision. She scanned Sophia from head to toe 3 times before speaking a single word. His aunt whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "A nurse? He actually brought home a nurse?" Carter, the smug cousin salivating over the empire, smirked from across the table like a predator. Only Alexander's younger sister Emma reached under the table, squeezed Sophia's cold hand, and whispered, "You're doing amazing. Don't let these vultures break you." What nobody expected was how unbreakable Sophia truly was. She had survived years of struggle, public hospital waiting rooms, rude senior doctors, and sleepless nights watching her mother fight for every breath. So when the sharp questions flew at dinner, she answered with calm intelligence. When they tested her, she responded with quiet grace. When Carter made a veiled, insulting joke about her common background, she smiled sweetly and delivered a reply so elegantly cutting that the entire table fell into stunned silence. Across the candlelit table, Alexander watched her with an unreadable expression that made her stomach flutter, something between surprise and dangerous fascination. Life inside Alexander's sprawling penthouse was beautiful, luxurious and achingly cold. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Manhattan, and priceless art pieces hung on the walls. Yet there was not a single personal photograph. No scattered books, no flowers, no evidence that a real human with feelings actually lived there. It felt more like a museum than a home. Sophia noticed everything on her very first night. She also noticed that Alexander worked until 2 or 3 a.m., ate his meals in silence, and never once turned on music or television just for comfort. She said nothing. She was only the temporary wife. This was not her place to question his emptiness. But on the 6th night, something small yet unforgettable happened. Sophia, missing the simple comfort of home-cooked food, prepared a large bowl of homemade pasta in his state-of-the-art kitchen that probably cost more than her entire building. The rich aroma of garlic, basil, and fresh tomatoes drifted through the entire penthouse. At midnight, Alexander emerged from his office, stopped in the hallway and stood completely still, breathing it in like a man who had forgotten what warmth smelled like. Without making it a big deal, Sophia slid a bowl toward him. He sat at the marble counter in his expensive shirt and ate in silence. When he finished, he looked up and said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard, "It's good." Just those 2 words, yet they carried the weight of something cracking inside him. Day by day, the carefully constructed armor around Alexander began showing hairline fractures, visible only to Sophia, because she paid attention like no one else ever had. She saw how he personally checked on every surgery patient at midnight when no one was watching. She discovered the small, worn photograph hidden in his desk drawer, a laughing young boy and his mother. She noticed that when stress became too heavy, he would stand motionless by the vast windows, staring at the glittering city lights as if searching for something he had lost long ago. She stored every tiny detail in her heart and told herself it meant nothing, She was only observing. Nothing personal. Nothing dangerous. 3 weeks into their arrangement, during a grand charity gala surrounded by 500 glittering guests, everything shifted in a single heartbeat. A drunk, aggressive businessman cornered Sophia near the bar, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise despite her firm refusals. Before security could react, Alexander was there, not as the polished billionaire, but as something primal and fiercely protective. He stepped between them, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet tone that made the man instantly release her and stumble back. Then Alexander turned to Sophia, his eyes no longer cold but burning with raw intensity. He gently touched her wrist and asked in a voice only she could hear, "Are you hurt?" In that moment, something deep inside Sophia's chest cracked wide open, a feeling she was terrified to name. On day 24, with only 6 days left, Sophia was organizing files in the study when a folded medical report slipped from between the pages of an old book. The moment she opened it, her world tilted violently. Her mother's name was at the top. The date was from 8 months ago, long before the corridor conversation, long before any contract. Alexander had been anonymously paying for her mother's expensive treatment for 8 full months without ever saying a word. Sophia's hands shook so badly the paper rustled loudly in the silent room. She confronted him that same night, placing the report on his desk with trembling fingers. Alexander glanced at it, then at her, his face a mask of perfect control. Sophia's voice cracked as she whispered, "Why? We had no deal 8 months ago. You barely knew me, so why were you paying for my mother's treatment?" The silence stretched painfully. Finally, Alexander leaned back and said in a low, almost vulnerable voice, "I knew you, Sophia. I had been watching you for 2 years. You were the only real honest thing in this entire hospital full of masks and money." The confession hung heavy in the air between them, cracking open years of carefully built walls. Sophia slowly lowered herself into the leather chair across from his massive desk, her legs suddenly weak. Everything in the contract, the professional distance, the strict rules, now felt paper-thin and ridiculous. She looked at this man who possessed everything the world could offer, yet carried an ocean of loneliness in his eyes. Not the loud, dramatic kind of loneliness that cried for attention. This was the quiet, devastating kind, the kind that built empires to fill the emptiness and still woke up hollow every morning. Alexander was not cold by nature. He had simply never been given a reason warm enough, real enough, to melt the ice he had wrapped around his heart for survival. That night they talked until the sunrise, painted the Manhattan skyline in soft gold and pink, not the polite, rehearsed conversations they performed for his family, but raw, unguarded ones that stripped them both bare. Alexander spoke about his mother who had died when he was only 11. Slow, painful, and helpless. The faded photograph in his drawer was the last picture of her smiling. He described how his father had turned that grief into iron control, how every achievement came with new conditions, how love in the Reid family had always been conditional. He became a surgeon to save lives because no one could save the one person who mattered most. Sophia listened in complete silence, tears slipping down her cheeks without shame. When he finally stopped, he looked almost surprised that he had revealed so much. She wiped her eyes quickly. He noticed, of course. He always noticed everything about her. The next morning, Sophia woke up with a terrifying, soul-crushing realization sitting on her chest like a boulder. She was in love with Alexander, Reid, completely, helplessly, irrevocably. She had broken the one sacred rule she had promised to keep. It had not happened in one dramatic moment. It had crept in slowly through midnight pasta bowls, hidden photographs, late-night patient checks, and the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. She pressed her face into the silk pillow and wanted to scream. She had exactly 5 days left. 2 choices stared at her: confess the truth and lose everything, the debt clearance, the money, her mother's future, or stay silent, complete the contract, collect what was owed, and disappear from his life forever with a shattered heart. She chose painful silence. For the final 5 days, Sophia threw herself into the role of the perfect, fake wife with heartbreaking determination. She smiled brightly at every family gathering, laughed at the right moments, held Alexander's arm with steady grace during the grand public ceremony, and delivered every rehearsed line flawlessly. No one could see the storm inside her. Every night after Alexander went to his study, She locked herself in her luxurious bedroom, turned on the shower to full blast to drown out the sound, and cried until her eyes were swollen and her chest ached. On the outside, she remained composed, elegant, and professional. On the inside, she was quietly falling apart, saying goodbye to a man she was never supposed to love in the first place. She believed she was hiding it perfectly. She was wrong. Alexander saw everything. He had always seen her more clearly than anyone else. He noticed how her smiles no longer reached her beautiful brown eyes. He caught the slight hesitation before she laughed. He realized she had stopped, humming softly to herself while moving around the kitchen, that tiny, precious habit he had secretly grown addicted to. On day 29, he sat alone in his dimly lit office, the final payment transfer glowing on his laptop screen, his finger hovering over the mouse. Something deep inside him, something he had buried under layers of control, trauma, and fear for years, refused to let her go. He closed the laptop with a sharp click. For the first time in his adult life, the always in control Dr. Alexander Reid had no idea what to do next. The thought of losing her terrified him more than losing the entire empire. Day 30 arrived like a final judgment. The contract was officially over.
Sophia had packed her old,
worn suitcase, the same one she had brought on the first day, and placed it neatly by the penthouse door. She had changed back into her simple clothes, faded jeans, and a plain white top. She looked exactly like the exhausted nurse from that hospital corridor again, except her eyes now carried the heavy weight of unspoken love and goodbye. Alexander walked into the living room and froze when he saw the suitcase. He stared at it for a long, painful moment, then lifted his gaze to her face. Sophia forced a careful, professional smile and said softly, "I think we did well. Your father seems completely convinced. Good luck with the empire, Dr. Reid." "Don't." His voice was so low, so rough it barely carried across the room, yet it stopped her heart. Sophia looked up. Alexander stood there with his hands deep in his pockets, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful, every muscle in his powerful body fighting an invisible war. The most controlled man she had ever known now looked like he was holding back a tsunami with nothing but willpower. He finally met her eyes and said, his voice cracking for the first time, "I broke the condition too, Sophia. I broke it on day 6, standing at that kitchen counter, eating the simplest pasta I've ever had, while you looked at me like I was just a man, not a billionaire, not a legacy, just me." He crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides. He didn't pull her into a dramatic Hollywood kiss. He simply stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, close enough to see the exact second his iron composure shattered completely. In a raw, desperate voice, he continued, "I don't want 30 days, Sophia. I want every single day after this. I want the homemade pasta at midnight. I want your humming filling this empty penthouse. I want the way you put rude people in their place with that quiet strength. I want the way you look at my patients like they matter. I want the real thing. No contract, no performance, no end date. I want you to stay because you want to stay. That's all I'm asking. Just tell me if you want me to." Sophia was already crying, hot, unstoppable tears streaming down her face. She nodded through the sobs, then whispered the word he needed to hear. "Yes, yes, I want you. I've wanted you for so long." 2 weeks later, at the family gathering, Sir William Reid observed his son with quiet astonishment. For the first time in over 20 years, since before Alexander's mother had passed, he saw genuine ease on his son's face. Alexander was laughing freely at something Sophia whispered to him, a real, unguarded, boyish laugh that lit up the entire room. Sir William set down his whiskey glass and remained silent for a long moment. His late wife had always told him the right person doesn't complete you. They simply remind you who you truly are beneath all the armor. Tonight, watching Sophia and Alexander together, he finally understood those words. He walked over to Sophia, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said with rare warmth, "Welcome to the family, my dear. Properly this time. You've already saved my son." Carter made one last desperate attempt at leaking the story to the press that the marriage was nothing but a paid, fake arrangement. The scandal exploded for one news cycle. Then Alexander called a press conference. He stood tall at the podium with Sophia right beside him, their fingers tightly intertwined. Looking straight into the cameras, he declared, "Yes, I asked her to pretend, but in pretending, she showed me what real love actually feels like. I have never made a better decision in my life." He turned to Sophia, eyes soft and full of open adoration. and added, "She is the strongest, most honest, most beautiful soul I have ever known. In this story, I am the lucky one." Sophia squeezed his hand under the podium. The video went globally viral within hours. Carter never tried anything again. Sophia's mother recovered completely and moved into a peaceful, beautiful home Alexander bought for her. Not as payment, not as part of any deal, but simply because she was Sophia's mother, and that made her family. When they met for the first time, Sophia's mother cupped Alexander's face with both hands the way only mothers can and said gently, "You had such sad eyes, my boy, but not anymore. Thank you for loving my daughter the way she deserves." Alexander had to look away for a moment to compose himself. Sophia watched them and felt a love so deep, so quiet and so complete that it almost scared her. This was what she had been fighting for her entire life. Not money, not luxury, but this kind of belonging. 1 year later, Sophia stood once again in that same hospital corridor where everything had begun. The marble floors still gleamed under the same dim late-night lights. But nothing else was the same. She was no longer the exhausted, broke nurse carrying heavy files and heavier worries. She was Mrs. Sophia Reid, still a nurse at heart, still humming, while cooking comfort food at midnight in their penthouse is still the same warm, strong woman, but now living a life that felt fully, beautifully hers. Alexander found her there, leaning against the familiar wall with a soft smile. He stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and whispered, "Same spot." She turned to him, eyes shining with love, and whispered back, "Different story." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers perfectly. This time there was no contract, no conditions, no ticking clock. Just two hearts that had found something real in the most unexpected place, and had chosen each other every single day since, with courage, with healing, and with whole, unbreakable love.